Hello YouTube, it's me, Ben Brooks, here again. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Lord Drayson versus Ben Goldacre science in journalism debate that took place 10 days ago in the Royal Institution on the 16th of September 2009. If you don't know where this debate came from, it all started as a Twitter debate between Paul Drayson and Ben Goldacre in the weeks preceding to the event, and it was set up by Times Higher Education in conjunction with the Royal Institution. And as always, I will link to it in the sidebar. I urge you to go and watch it, it's very interesting, and some of the points raised are quite important ones. However, it is 1.5 hours long. Okay, so I've watched the debate and the questions which came afterwards from members of the audience and via Twitter, and I made a few notes. Don't know whether you could read that or not. Probably doesn't really matter either way. And I'm going to I'm going to discuss a few of the points raised. So, let's start with Lord Drayson, the first speaker in the debate. Now, I agree with him on a few things. First of all, that science journalism, where it's done by specific scientific journalists, can be very well done, and that there is a lot of rubbish out there. He acknowledged this, and I think that it's good that he did. He also said that things have improved since the days of BSE and MMR and things like that. And whilst, to an extent, I agree with him, he is correct in saying that, I don't think it's improved a great deal. I still read a lot of things in newspapers, and I only read the Times and the Telegraph, quite highbrow newspapers, and there's still a lot of things in there that I read them and I think, no, that's factually incorrect, and I can go and look it up in the journals and the material and say why it's incorrect. The man on the street can't access that information. You can't say to a man on the street, go and look at this scientific paper, because as a general rule they'll be unable to get to it, because you need to pay a subscription or you have to be a member of an academic establishment, etc, etc, etc. Lord Drayson also said that sensational stories can also be good science, and whilst he is correct, you can have a sensational story and you can have a journalist write it very well and adhere to the rules of academic integrity. More often than not, they don't do that, and the sensational stories tend to be the ones that are abhorrently incorrect. And Ben Goldacre pointed out that if you have a scientific article, the ones that are most likely to be made into sensational stories are the ones that are most likely to be wrong, or the ones that are most likely to be bad science. Lord Drayson also cited a 2008 public attitudes survey in which 72% said that they trusted scientists to tell the truth, and that was up 7 points from 1997. Now, I'll probably be getting the difference between percentages and percentage points wrong here, but to go up by 7 points in essentially 7 points in 11 years, to my mind that's not very much, and for only 72% of the British population to trust scientists to tell the truth, that's horrific. Science, by definition, is the search for fact, and if a scientist is going to lie, then they're not a scientist. So I think that survey, whilst it was meant as a, look, journalists and scientists are viewed very well in the public domain, it goes and shows exactly the opposite, or at least that's my opinion. So moving on now to talk about Dr. Ben Goldacre's points. I agree with a lot more of this than I agreed with Lord Drayson's statements. However, they're both, in my opinion, no one won the debate. But Mr. Goldacre pointed out that newspapers are trying to sell newspapers. They're going to do that, and sometimes the best way of doing that is political posturing. And he pointed out to a very obvious example of this, where in the United Kingdom the Daily Mail stood quite strongly against something called the cervical cancer jab, which I know very little about, but I'm using the example nonetheless. Whereas in the Republic of Ireland, the Irish Daily Mail, which I'm guessing from the fact that the conclusion's been drawn is run by the same company, was fighting very stringently for the cervical cancer jab. Now, that's obviously political posturing, and to my mind, science journalism shouldn't be about political posturing. Science journalism should be about, here's the facts, this is what the conclusions are, and this is how it's going to affect you. It shouldn't have anything political about it at all. He also made a very valid point about science being misrepresented and how, quote, dodgy journalism, end quote, erodes public faith and understanding of investigative endeavour. Now, you only have to go and look around YouTube to see that there is a very poor understanding of investigative endeavour amongst the vast majority of the population. Now, whether that be the population of the world, as in the case with YouTube, or in the population of the United Kingdom, journalism definitely has a part to play in that, where you have all of these silly stories, such as stories about how men can get bigger penises and various other things that really have very little scientific merit at the best of times. Another set of survey results that was mentioned was another public attitude survey of some kind, where 2,000 odd people were surveyed regarding healthy living advice, and greater than 50% say that scientists are always changing their minds about it, and therefore greater than 25% said it's best to ignore the scientists and do or eat whatever you like. Now, another set of results that was pointed out was that the media affect science, in that if a scientific paper is published and featured in the mass media, that paper will garner more citations. That is, more scientists from other areas will look at that paper and use it in their own research than if it isn't covered in the mass media. Now, that just goes to show that some scientists can be lazy and not look up the other things in the field, but it also says something about the fact that the media can control what science does, and that's definitely not a good thing. Ben Goldacre also commented on what he calls systems failures, where an editor will say to a journalist, I want you to write about X, and the journalist will want to say, look, I don't want to write about that, it's obviously bunk, it's not of any use to the general population. But they can't do that because they have to pay off a mortgage, and if they get in bad books with their editor, they're not going to be allowed to write any more stories. So where do we go from here then? Well, two major points that I'd like to bring to the discussion are, firstly, one thing that can be done in the journalistic environment is get the scientists in. Get the scientists to come into the newsroom or come into the newspapers and actually to explain their science in their way. It just means that when the scientist puts across their science, they're not being misrepresented, and what's coming out is a darn sight closer to the truth than something that's been through a press office, through a press release, and eventually through the sorting tray of a journalist sat at a desk. Secondly, is to encourage scientists to get involved in mass media themselves, get them blogging, get them YouTubing, get them out there talking to people. And I think there's two problems with this. One is that they wouldn't be recognised if they do. I know of one person, an ex-lecturer who's now retired, a man called Ian West, and I'll link to the site in the sidebar, who runs a website dedicated to the geology of the area where I live when I'm not at university. And he's recently been given an award of some description for that. But there's so little to recognise people for going out of their way to get involved with the public. And the second problem is the nature of science itself. Now, this has nothing to do with journalism, but it certainly affects it. And this is the unfortunate emphasis that academia puts on trying to get and gaining research grants. The problem with it is that you spend your entire life writing to scientific bodies asking for more money. That, I think, is one of the big problems that faces getting the information out there to a man on the street.